Okay, finishing off with Hume's criticisms. As I said, he makes some subsidiary arguments, and we're going to be focusing on three of them. Well, the first criticism is quite similar to his inductive argument, and we call it the sufficient number. Hume says that there's never been a sufficient number of trustworthy people attesting to a singular miracle to actually believe that one took place. Well, the first criticism here of Hume is, well, what's he actually mean? For one, why is it requiring upstanding, trustworthy people? You know, who is actually trustworthy? Hume seems to be suggesting that it is only people of education who are trustworthy, and in fact, we could argue that it is these people who have more of the capacity to lie. And what would a sufficient number actually be? 1, 2, 5, 20 or 100? There isn't actually a figure. His second criticism is that the miracles actually seem to only happen in ignorant and barbarous nations. Now, whilst we might look at this, I mean, Hume was a historian as well as a philosopher, and it's certainly true that in less civilised times we had belief in miracles, but in modern day society where we have got civilisation, we still do have a belief in miracles. So again, calls this into question. His third criticism is the idea that they cancel each other out. Now, what he means by that is that all different religious traditions have a belief in miracles, and they all use the miracles to validate their own faith. Well, they all can't be right. You know, if Judaism is right, then God wouldn't be performing miracles with Christians or with Muslims, particularly with the monotheistic trio of religions. Christianity believes that God's turned his back on the Jews, Jesus was the Messiah. Muslims believe he's turned his back on both because Jesus wasn't the Messiah, he was just a prophet. But God performs miracles in all of them, well, he's certainly a bit of a trickster. So Hume's argument is that it generally affects the credibility of miracles in general terms. You know, all can't be right, so none of them are right. Well, you know, we hopefully identified the problem there. Just because all of them can't be right doesn't actually mean one of them isn't right. So maybe the general credibility isn't affected. And the last criticism is that we generally, as a species, have a natural dispensation to, or natural disposition, to embellish stories, to exaggerate. The feeding of the 5,000 could be understood as a lot of people gathered and they all shared the food and people didn't think there was going to be enough than there was. And this becomes there was more in crumbs left over than began with. That need for the miraculous often sort of fills a little section of human psyche, perhaps. Now, go back to the criticisms of induction, which we said in the previous video. Now, one of the main criticisms of Hume's principle of induction comes in the sense that some people have argued that rather than making it more likely to occur, the more instances of something make it less likely. So take the sun example that I mentioned before. The sun only has a particular life. That means that the more that the sun is around, the less time it's got left. So you could argue that the less likely it is actually going to occur. So it doesn't happen in all cases. But the perhaps strongest criticism comes from the fact that it doesn't seem to take account the weight of personal experience. So although you might have seen many instances, let's look at the falsification debate. The reason that the theory of gravity from Newton, not Einstein like it said in the previous email, Tom, that the real benefit of the law of gravity, or the reason why it has meaning, is because we can falsify. We know what needs to take place. And this is the idea of the exception of the rule. The exception proves the rule. Just because we set a rule does not mean that it cannot be broken. And if it is broken, it does not mean that the rule is necessarily wrong for the majority of times. So for instance, if I drop this pen, or as usual it fell to the floor, well, I know that if it floated, that the law is false. Or do I know that the law is false? Now when we apply this to Hume's principle of induction, that's all, the more instances of something does not count against that one actual event. And if I witness that particular event, that has greater weight for me. And this is something which we could use perhaps Mitchell's parable of the stranger and the partisan with religious language. The partisan meets a stranger and that experience holds greater weight than the other events. So we used it in falsification debate to say that he did accept falsification criteria, he just had stronger evidence. You don't need to simply say, well, I need to rewrite the laws of nature, but that violation that you witnessed has greater weight. Okay, Hume finished.